Welcome in, everybody. Welcome in. No matter what time of the day or night it is a great time to be a Gamecock. I am Tony, here with Adam, raised as gentlemen. You know, it's ladies first, and we have a huge win to discuss as South Carolina just dispatched the LSU Tigers, sent them back to snowy Baton Rouge, 66-56. They came here to Columbia, and they were sent packing, and it was just a great defensive effort. It wasn't anything with a crazy offensive output, again, just putting 66 points up, but LSU was frustrated the whole game, and it was just an overall sense of energy, sense of passion from the team, from Dawn, from the fams out there, Colonial Life Arena, who, showed up and showed out despite a 5 p.m. tip on a Friday, despite all traffic and maybe people not being able to get off of work. That wasn't a factor, because that place was rocking, and it was just a spectacle to see on national television. And this is something now where Adam, South Carolina, at this point, and this is why they're not calling it an official rivalry, because 17 straight wins in a row against the LSU Tigers for our women.
That is a very impressive number, and I know it is hard to call it a rivalry if it's only one-sided, but still, The Tigers really did try and take it to them until they eventually fell off at the end. But that first half was really, really competitive, what we thought it was going to be, 3-point game at the half. I didn't expect them to start pulling away like they did, but like you said, it was the defense that really started to be the difference maker in this game.
It was, between the blocks, the steals. It was just such a focal point, and it really, really gave it that little bit of a shift, especially as you made that transition going into the third quarter. Because, it was tight. It was only a 3-point lead at the half. But the one pivotal point where you really got the crowd into it was when Raven Johnson scored, stole it, scored again, got that place rocking it. And that point in the third quarter, there was no looking back. They could not fight back against that. There was just too much in the way of positive energy. There was too much momentum that South Carolina was just able to, ride that wave all the way to the end of the game. And other players stepped up as well. We're going to get here into the stats in a little bit, but it wasn't just, again, a great effort from one person, as we've been seeing all season long. And guess what? We could say it again. Another fantastic all-around effort from South Carolina, and still continuing to make sure that they are locking down things low under that basket, even with Watkins being out for the season.
I was really excited hearing the fans on television. I was a little worried, like we mentioned, because of the delay, that the place wouldn't have as much energy, but it felt like it only added to it. That place was, from start to finish, felt like it was just rocking the entire time.
It was, and it was just an incredible spectacle to see. And as we go into some of these stats, I just want to go over what South Carolina had. Quickly, you could just take a look at what LSU had, and no surprise, some of their top scorers. You had Flage, then you had Morrow for them. Both had some pretty good days, 13, 15 points. Shooting percentage, all right. Overall, as a team, though, for LSU, this is the key stat here, they didn't crack the 30% barrier. So they shot under 30% for the game. And that wasn't just because they were missing shots. It was because they were getting suffocated by South Carolina's defense. They just did a fantastic job down there. There was one point in the game, I forget exactly when it was. I remember when I texted you, it was in the third quarter, I believe, or early in the fourth. It was 9-1. A 9-1 block ratio between South Carolina and what LSU had. And that's just going to be, of course, one big tale of the game, that they could not get some of those shots, especially down low, over our defenders. Kitts had an incredible game. Chloe was shown out there. But really, the player of the game for me, just looking over everything and watching the game in real time, it was Sanaya Fagan. This was a breakout game for her. She had an incredible, listen to this stat sheet that she filled up. She had 12 points, pretty respectable in its own sense, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and 3 blocks for her in that game. So great to see from Sanaya. And yet again, filling in that role that Watkins could have been doing this point of the season. But between her and Joyce Edwards and Kitts, and they're just all coming together and really just filling up the stat sheet on their own to make sure that you're not going to see that deficit, and that South Carolina is still just rolling along, even though LSU is a top tier team. They're elite. They could easily be in the Elite Eight and Final Four at the end of the season, but South Carolina was able to take command in that second half and outlast them, which is what we talked about too. Just with the being able to plug and play players from the bench in with the starters and not have that fatigue perhaps as much as the end of the game like some other teams might because you have your starters in for so long. None of that from South Carolina in this affair.
Yeah, it feels like this team has really meshed together super well. Like the chemistry is there. It doesn't feel like when they're at their best, like we saw in this game, the scoring wasn't going super crazy like in the past few weeks, but just it didn't feel like there were any holes. It felt like everyone was doing what they needed to. They were making the plays on defense, and they were just keeping the ball out of the hoop for the Tigers. And it was a really clean game. It felt like, even if the percentages weren't there, the points weren't blowing anyone away. It was more than enough to dominate them.
It was, and also here we go again for another game. Leading scorer, freshman Joyce Edwards, 14 points for her. She led all scorers between the bench and the starters. And there you go. It's just everything that needed to happen at this point of the season for them to continue to see success. It's happened. It is happening. Adjustments are being made. They're making smart decisions on some shots. In all honesty, if they could have had just a little bit better of a shooting percentage and even took some better shots themselves, they easily could have won this game by 15 points plus. Because they did some poor shooting themselves. South Carolina only 37.1%, not great. Not shooting the lights out, but it didn't matter because the defense was so good. So they didn't need to do that, which is phenomenal. That you can still have a 10-point win over a top 5 team, and you're still not playing your A game. And that's something I hear around the sports world a lot. Teams being able to still overcome something or win a game, but not playing your A game. So that's basically the main takeaway here is that if this team could actually still play a closer to a perfect game, it's pretty far to say that a perfect game is something that's possible to exist. But, at least stay shooting 45, 50%, or even at least over 40%. They probably would have cracked that win around 15 points. But you know what? You can't be mad at this one. Top 5 win again over still, an opponent that you definitely see as what could be a roadblock for you, but moved it right along, and here they are now, still undefeated in SEC play and perched atop the conference.
Yeah, I'm really, really glad that this set has gone the way it has. The SEC road that they've been on thus far, staying undefeated through that real gauntlet, that meat of the schedule that we kept talking about. It's so important, of course, down the line, this team could end up, slipping up later down the line, but to start these last few games and to win the way they have, it hasn't even been, these buzzer beaters are just barely hanging on. It's like this game, and like I said, in the first half, it was a little back and forth, but in the second half, it was just keeping them from scoring and not giving them fits. And it really does, really does bode well for down the season or down the line for the season. Of just how well they can play these highly ranked teams, these undefeated teams at this point. And I've just been super excited that they have went through this schedule, which I thought we would have, 2-3 games that really came down to it and it could go either way. And they have just established themselves as, we had that slip up against UCLA, but we are still the team, one of the teams to beat.
Yeah,
top 3 teams to beat.
Well, yeah, and they have a better resume as well. And despite the loss, that's why I've seen a lot of chatter of, hey, South Carolina should be the number 1 AP overall team because they have the much better resume right now. They've beaten other teams, but I get it. UCLA is still undefeated, and they have the head-to-head matchup. So, you could analyze that any way you want to. It's still tough to say that they can't be number 1 because, hey, they beat us and they have an unblemished record. So. Even from an AP voter standpoint, I get it if you wouldn't want to move South Carolina past them just because of that straight up head-to-head. And, it's not like it was the closest game. They held South Carolina in check, even though that was very early in the season. It's definitely something to be considered. And either way, I fully anticipate South Carolina and UCLA to be number one seeds going into that tournament, especially if South Carolina can continue to hold on to this dominance that they have been able to output in SEC play. And perhaps, Lauren Betts, is she South Carolina's kryptonite? Is she going to be the one possibly standing in their way come season to end? Just like last year when it was going to be Caitlin Clark versus South Carolina, is it going to be Lauren Betts versus South Carolina to end the season, possibly for a national title shot or win? And that's definitely something that's possible. It's not out of the realm of possibility. A lot of other things could change. Things could happen. But that is definitely something that we are looking onto right now. And also, Adam, to what you said, yeah, it's still going to be to a point of the season where you could have a hiccup or two. You can slip up because it's so hard to just go through this schedule and be undefeated like they were last year. That was just such an incredible feat, and to try and do something like that 2 years in a row, at least you don't have to worry about it because, yeah, they already have that loss. But I'm sure Texas will be looking for vengeance. Still got to travel there. I'm sure they're going to have a great crowd on hand, and perhaps they will have closer to that perfect type of game that I mentioned, because they certainly were far from that when they came here to Columbia. But maybe when we go down to Austin, they get things a little bit better. They make some better adjustments. They'll have some crowd noise on their side of the spectrum, and that could end up being a little bit of a tougher game. We'll see how that one pans out. But either way, we have another orange team that's going to be coming up, and that is tomorrow on January 27th. We are recording this on the 26th there in the afternoon before all these NFL championship games. But this is definitely going to be one that was circled too. Early in the season, I was a little bit more impressed with what Tennessee was doing. I thought that they would be a bit more of a team that was really contending for the SEC title, but they tripped up. I'm not sure what happened down the road. They've had some close losses. They've definitely been on the bad side of luck. But just looking at some of these games, and you look back, they lost 3 straight, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. They lost 3 straight. One, they lost to LSU by 2 points. All right. Then they lost to Texas by 4. And then they lost to Oklahoma by 1. So all these games that they lost, and then also Vanderbilt by 1. So the biggest margin that they've lost by was at Texas by 4. So still a very good team. I don't want to just say, hey, okay, this team has 4 losses. This is a team that South Carolina could just roll over. Because, no, I don't believe that. It's definitely been more on the bad side of luck and some turnovers. And this is something where they could definitely get themselves together a little bit more. But overall, this is still a beatable team. This is a team that they lost Oklahoma. Oklahoma is one we dispatched. And there's definitely a depth talent gap between us and Tennessee. So while I was a little bit more worried about them early in the season, they looked like they were rolling. Maybe they might have had 1 loss or so by the time we ended up going to Knoxville. But they've definitely shown that they can be vulnerable. And South Carolina could try to take advantage of that and try to hand them their 5th loss of the year.
Yeah, I was just looking at their schedule, and the teams they lose to, it seems like we have had really no issue in holding on to, and similar to that game a few weeks ago against Oklahoma, where I said, they were kind of losing these close games that we handled pretty easily.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it'll be a very similar situation against the Volunteers. If you're ice cold right now, if you're the Volunteers, losing 3 of 5 your last few, I think it shouldn't be a game to put too much weight into, not like the Texas or the UConn game down the line. But, of course, you don't want to overlook an opponent either. I just don't particularly think this one will be anything to write home about.
It shouldn't be unless they really start to have some things go in their favor. And there will be a few things. Perhaps just it's going to be a situation where they're feeling like they're getting to a point in the season. They don't have anything to lose too much because, you've already lost some games. What's one more against South Carolina? If you lose, like, whatever. Because no one's going to be expecting you to win. But also, it is a 7 p.m. game coming up on this Monday. ESPN2 has it, so it's going to be another national telecast. It's going to be at a time of the evening where they could definitely pack fans in there. And Tennessee is one of the most proudest programs in the history of women's basketball. They've had such incredible history. They do have a great fan base up there in Knoxville that shows up and also shows out to games. Maybe not as much as we do here in Columbia, of course, especially with our success over the past 5 years plus. but they do have that base. So that's definitely going to be something that they'll have in their favor. And with the number 2 team in the country coming to town, I'm sure that's going to be something that will pack fans into that arena. And as we go over this, looking at their roster, still going to be lacking in that height department. I'll just put that out there right now. Always need to throw that little nugget in there. 2 of their best players and scorers from a scoring and rebounding standpoint are both guards, which is just a recipe that has still worked in our favor. And their second leading scorer right now is Ruby Whitehorn. She is a junior guard from Detroit. She's putting up 14 points a game, almost 5 rebounds a game, and she's definitely going to be one to watch. She's very speedy. She's got that upperclassman leadership to go with her, so got to watch out for Miss Ruby. And then their main scorer, who has really been giving anyone fits, especially in their wins this year, has been Talasia Cooper. And she's been putting up 18 points a game, almost 6 rebounds a game. And she's actually from South Carolina, and she's a sophomore. So she is going to be one to watch out for the Lady Vols. She has been more of the one that has been getting to the bucket more. She has a good mid-range game. She could shoot the long ball. So definitely need to watch out for Talasia Cooper. And it's just going to be another one of those situations where if you can shut her down, you can lock her up. And luckily, she's only still 6 feet tall. You're going to be able to, I think, handle Tennessee on the road. There might be some turnovers here and there. There might be some unforced errors, especially if the crowd noise for them is really good. But overall, she's going to be, if you could just lock down more of 1 or 2 players, then I think you're going to give the rest of the team fits overall, and you can just keep this recipe going where you're going to be able to outlast them in the end, and you're just going to have that great depth on the bench that you can mix in and just power your way to victory.
Yeah, and it seems like these last few games where there have been these 1-2 punches on the opposing team, South Carolina's done a really good job of keeping them quiet, not so much as neutralizing them like we did like in the Oklahoma game, but over the broad schedule that we've had, we have done a very good job of just taking away the top 1 or 2 options of a team, and that really allows the Gamecocks to pull away in those really important moments like we did in the second half at LSU.
It's too difficult to be able to not rely on your bench, and that is just something that can't happen all the time. You're going to be on the bench sometimes for a reason, that you're lacking a little bit more of the ability from your starters. You are an underclassman, or your game is a little raw, and you need to be able to develop a little bit more, which happens a lot in basketball for the men's and women's game. But just in a quick reference back to the LSU matchup, because I'm sure, because you don't have it in front of you here, but I do. How many points do you think came from the LSU bench?
I'm going to guess 8.
2.
What?
2 points from the LSU bench. 1 for 7. So that's, overall, that was just one shooter, but overall, they're 1 for 9. Their bench was 1 for 9, 2 points.
You're not going to win many games doing that.
So that's a glaring stat, and that's just something that is, so far on the other side of the spectrum from what South Carolina was able to do. And that's just going to be what they can be able to accomplish. And I will say also, referencing back even further, UCLA game, they got some good scoring from their bench too in that game. So there's clearly a very finite, small amount of teams that can be able to rely on scoring from their bench in the women's game right now. There is still the ability to win with your starters. That can happen. Crazier things have happened. You just might have a really hot shooting night. Other team could turn the ball over a lot. But overall, very, very limited amount of teams that can rely on that bench scoring. And South Carolina has just been able to do that. Tennessee, clearly not either. Just looking a little bit deeper into their stats, most of their scoring has come from the starters. So it's just that longevity into a game is just so tough to keep up with. And as we've been going over this in circles yet again, I do think that just South Carolina will find more of that energy, find more of that scoring from the bench again, and that they could not necessarily coast because, you still got to respect some of these road games for what they are. But I wouldn't be surprised that South Carolina was able to, hand them the biggest margin loss overall for the season, and it could be somewhere in between 15 and 18 points. I would probably put it in that threshold, as long as nothing is going crazy in the other direction, or they're just having a ridiculous shooting night or hoisting up some threes and they're just happening to go in for Tennessee.
Yeah, I don't see it happening. I think a good 15, 20 point difference will probably be what the final score shows up as. I just don't see a team who's really, really red hot right now going through
that too.
Probably the most difficult section of the regular season schedule, coming out, undefeated in that aspect. And then you turn around to Tennessee, who's kind of stumbling right now.
Yeah. Confidence definitely shaken on their end of where they've been in the SEC schedule, falling back a little bit. So, and that gets to you, especially when you get to that point of being frustrated from so many close losses of 5 points or less. That definitely gets to you as a player. I can't, attest to that at the college level or, know what's going on in their head, but I assume it is.
Yeah, it gets frustrating, even as a fan's perspective, just knowing that you have a team who is, top 25 in the country, and then your last 5 when you really need to, you have a few close ones too, and it's just you have the opportunity, but you don't make it happen. It can get super frustrating, even as a fan. As a player on the team, I'm sure it's pretty terrible to be trying to figure out when is this slide going to stop.
Yeah, it's to also that point of thinking from a fan aspect. It's like, why can't this team dig deeper? Even as a player, it's like, ladies, why can't we dig deep enough to be able to overcome these deficits? Why do we keep losing by a few points?
Yeah, it's like, where are we going wrong that we're letting these slip through?
So, and you got South Carolina coming to town. It is not getting any easier for the Volunteers, but that is our 2 cents on that matter. And yes, so that is the current orange team we have in our way. But just looking ahead, definitely a little bit more worrisome if Texas can start to regroup and get themselves together a little bit more. And then further into February when we got UConn and Paige Beckers coming to town. Another one that Colonial Life Arena is going to be rocking for. And I haven't looked up yet online. I know ESPN did talk about it. They were disappointed that they couldn't have College Game Day here for the game because of moving it up. But this is something, as we look to that game, they might try to get back in town for, which would be nice, and I think would be much more ideal, because if that was the case, then they would be able to do it in the morning here in South Carolina, which would be awesome if they could be here for the UConn game. So that's going to be one to watch. And that game tips off, I believe, at 1 on ABC. So we'll look on to some of those huge matchups still to come, because, those are never in short supply for this team, the way they schedule things and this conference that they're in. But they're continuing to ride the wave of success. They are still undefeated in the SEC schedule. And from a team, player, coach, fan aspect, I feel like everyone should be pretty content right now.
I feel like they're firing on all cylinders. Nothing that has plagued them at the beginning of the season, the height deficits, the slow starts, stuff like that. It just hasn't been seen these last few games, and that's what I feel has let them be as great as they have, in contention for that number 1 ranking. They've just been super impressive over this SEC stretch, and I think that everyone top to bottom, like you said, they have to be feeling pretty good of the chances now as we get closer and closer. I know it's still a little bit away, but we're getting close to March already. So it is on the horizon. Not something to worry about just yet, but definitely thinking about that title.
That's right. A couple of things you can, at least as of recent, rely on here in South Carolina is a ridiculous amount of pollen going into the spring, and South Carolina women's basketball being really hot heading into the NCAA tournament. So that is what we are going to be looking on to. Also, as we go along here into the spring, we will be starting to pivot into our second area of programming from the Northern South Podcast Network on YouTube, where we will be diving more into NASCAR analysis and breakdowns of upcoming races, because that is what we have as a split with this channel. So it's going to really start to ramp up as we look towards the Clash up in Winston-Salem that we'll be in attendance for. We'll have some content coming from that and a lot more NASCAR news and updates along with our beloved South Carolina women's basketball team. So this is, of course, the Ladies First podcast. That one is called the Palmetto Pit Stop. And for anyone who might be interested in that, maybe you just like to hear our smooth and buttery voices, you could tune over to that one as well when we start to get into that. And that's really going to start to ramp up as we go into February and this upcoming spring, and especially when we see the women's basketball season coming to a close, and we'll start to focus on that as well. But again, that's all going to be under the Northern South Podcast Network umbrella here on YouTube, and hopefully soon with your continued support, subscriptions. Just again, all you just got to click the button. It's free, luckily still on YouTube. Eventually, we do hope to have some ads, as annoying as ads can be. But yeah, that's all going to be things we're looking on to this spring, and we are looking forward to all of it.
Yeah, and in terms of the support, as you mentioned just before we started recording, breached that 100 subscriber mark.
Yeah, woo!
Yeah, first milestone met.
Little small round of applause for that.
Yeah.
Yes. Triple digits.
Yeah, it is nice. I mean, it takes a lot to even gain a few subscribers. So getting over 100 and the support that we've had already on these podcasts is pretty great. So very, very thankful to everyone who's subscribed and who watches these, of course, every week. And hopefully can only keep going from here.
Yeah, and the new goal going into the spring, as we've been still trying to promise you guys, is still wanting to eventually bring video content. And I know that'll make it generally more of an enjoyable experience and a little bit more interactive as well, especially once we could start having that and interviewing guests. But at least for the first year, being able to launch these and just for what we've been able to do, I appreciate y'all for being here again. And this is the Ladies First Podcast, and we hope to see you all next time. Have an incredible rest of your weekend or next week, whenever you happen to stumble upon this podcast. Thanks again for being here.